At one point, RTMark had a thing where, do a fake website and have basically people believe it. We did gwbush.com, and that was kind of an interesting thing. And so, in other words, it looked pretty darn close to the exploratory committee thing for Bush for his presidency. But the thing is, instead of like, kind of like waving, we had him pointing at a young black woman, and people bought that. And then we did another piece that was a fake website for the World Trade Organization, and we did a few appearances that were in the first Yes Men movie. We wanted to see how far we could push taking tactical media in kind of doing trying to show up, doing an obvious Jonathan Swift-esque spoof of something, showing up in a big gold lame suit with a phallic appendage that pops out that you can control remote workforces and things like that. And people just bought it, and it was kind of incredible.
On this episode of the Plutopia podcast, conceptual artist, writer, and educator Patrick Lichty joins John and Scoop in the virtual studio. We explore Patrick's current and prior adventures in media art, virtual reality, and augmented reality.
Patrick Lichty is our guest today at the Plutopia podcast. Patrick is a media artist, a writer, futurist, curator, and designer of over 30 years. Lately, he's been professor of media design at Zayed University in Dubai, where he's director of the Immersive Media Research Cluster. As an activist and artist, he was part of or worked with collectives RTMark, Pocha Nostra, the Yes Men, Terminal Time, Second Front, Shared Universe, and the Critical Art Ensemble, showing in the Venice and Whitney biennials. So welcome, Patrick.
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, happy to have you here.
Yeah.
And right now you're still in Dubai and still leading this immersive media cluster.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's in Abu Dhabi. I'm in Dubai for some family reasons for a couple of weeks. Yeah, is that basically the thing is that my university, actually, to tell you the truth, we have things here in the UAE, like the Museum of the Future, which is sponsored by the Dubai Future Foundation, and you've seen these things like the flying taxis, the jetpack, fire stuff. And the thing is that sometimes I think that Gibson's cyberpunk and that sort of William and Bruce's stuff, it's like, I think that honestly, in some ways, I think that it could be just as well as between Los Angeles and Chiba and stuff like that. It could easily be Dubai, Istanbul, and maybe like Almaty and stuff like that, because there's actually a lot of really interesting, there's high tech and underground and just all these sorts of things, going on around here. But no, what I've been doing is that they gave me a pretty good budget. We've got a 4-meter immersive dome, and I've been teaching young Arabic women how to do VR and AR, and I've been doing research here, and it's been a great experience. And Zayed University has been very generous with me.
Well, we may come back around to that, but I'd like to talk first about this history you have with collective digital art projects. Can you talk a little bit about things like what you did with RTMark and the Yes Men and Second Front and Second Life and that sort of thing?
Yeah, this kind of goes back a little bit. Is that I'll kind of do the initial intro. Is that I was born in '62 in Akron, Ohio, and actually I grew up behind the Goodyear Zeppelin air dock, where they used to, where they had, the naval air, the 5 naval airships, like the Los Angeles, the Akron, the Macon, and all that sort of thing. And the thing is that, I was there for about the first, 30 or so years of my life. And actually I was kind of a Star Trek nerd. And we actually for a while had we were the first group who were working on restoring the original Galileo shuttlecraft prop. So if you ever go out on there's a few pictures of that if you ever go out on my Facebook. But so the thing is that I don't know, it's I did computer engineering back in the 80s for a little while, and I basically wound up in respect to my wife, I'll just say that I met my first wife who basically told me to that we were going to be kind of an academic and artistic concern, and I need to do something that's kind of a little less grounded. So I wound up getting into art. Wound up working with people like, doing illustrations for people like Arthur and Mary Louise Croker, and, and during that time, I, briefly, met you and folks down at Fringeware and Mondo and that sort of thing. So I was kind of like this commentary person around, kind of like the cyber culture of the early 90s, And in that time, I was doing visual sociology with a guy named John Epstein, and we were doing these industrial rock videos that were kind of based off of the sociology and social theory of people like Baudrillard and Virilio and things like that. But the thing is that I would go and I would collage, all the stuff I found from cable TV, and I would make these, just really kind of crazy. Industrial rock videos. But basically the thing is, a couple guys out of California at the time who were going to New York, a couple guys, Igor and Jacques, came by and said, hey, we're starting this thing called RTMark. It's this anti-corporate activist group, and you want to be part of it. And said, they came by and saw my videos. Said, oh, you're weird enough for this. And what happened is that about 2000, we wound up having all these corporate subversive projects. One of them was the Barbie Liberation Organization, where you had the G.I. Joe and Barbie voice boxes swapped, and the other one was the Simcopter hack, when on Friday the 13th, all the bikini-clad girls turned into Speedo wearing leather boys and stuff like that. And and another project was we funded deconstructing Beck, because at one time Beck was kind of famous for not compensating people for samples. So we funded illegal art for to do an album of nothing but Beck songs done with Beck samples. But the thing is that at one point, RTMark had a thing where do a fake website and have basically people believe it. We did gwbush.com, and that was kind of an interesting thing. And so, in other words, it looked pretty darn close to the exploratory committee thing for Bush for his presidency. But the thing is, instead of kind of like waving, we had him pointing at a young black woman, and people bought that. And then we did another piece that was a fake website for the World Trade Organization, and we did a few appearances that are in the first Yes Men movie. That we did some kind of some. We wanted to see how far we could push taking tactical media in kind of doing trying to show up, doing an obvious Jonathan Swift-esque spoof of something, showing up in a big gold lame suit with a phallic appendage that pops out that you could control remote workforces and things like that. And people just bought it, and it was kind of incredible. And then basically there's some other groups. It's like I've collaborated with people like Guillermo Gomez Pena and Pocha Nostra. I was involved in a few performances with them, and then also Steve Kurtz, who was famous for the stuff that led to the movie Strange Culture that Lynn Hirschman Leeson did. And then basically after graduate school, started a performance art group called Second Front, which was, we did about 50 performances. I'd say we're in a little hiatus, but kind of doing performance art in virtual worlds, in VR and Second Life and things like that. And the big question was in that is that how do we, how does social relations come about, as we keep getting more and more cyborg and we keep getting more and more virtualized and that sort of thing. And one of the things that was instrumental in questioning that, was performance art of the 60s and 70s. And at the time in 95, Marina Abramovich, basically resituated a number of performance pieces at the Guggenheim, and a few artist friends of ours, like from New York and that sort of thing, started resituating things in Second Life. And about a year in, I thought, this is all very well and good, but let's try to do stuff that you can't do in the real world. Let's do stuff that's specific. Let's do stuff that's let's test the medium. And so actually, we brought in some other people like Gazira Babeli out of Milan, and Bibi Hansen, who's actually Beck's mom, which was kind of interesting because actually Beck really liked the illegal art CD. And we started doing Fluxus work, and the idea that, like, one thing, like Al Hansen did one thing for Yoko Ono where he would push a piano off the side of the building. And so the thing is, I would do a piece where I'd be sitting at the piano, and then I scripted something up. So basically, just all these Steinway pianos would come running down on my head, and I don't know. I wasn't very judgmental about that. I just kind of said, this is something you can't do in real life. But the thing is that on one hand, what you're talking about is that, you're talking about, both the formal and social potential, the virtual, and not, on one hand, you can say, oh, this is kind of silly, you're dropping pianos on your head. But the whole thing is it points at things that are much, much more philosophical, And so anyway, but, all these things, all these collectives, there are two things that I think about, is that on one hand, I think that I have always liked being part of art projects or part of, collectives that created real good conversations, for a global audience. And the other thing is that all my work has always tried to ask a question or work through something, either personally or philosophically or something. And a lot of these collectives I've worked with, have often really dealt with some pretty interesting and thorny topics, and I think that's always been enjoyable.
You were involved early on with AR, and I went on last night to see what the current state of augmented reality was. And
Sure.
it was disturbing that the first thing that popped up was some guy that had a 360-degree video set up, went to the Viper Lounge to document the last resting spot of the actor River Phoenix. And that was an early plot device in some cyberpunk fiction. And I was just like, what's the
Yeah.
point? That really wasn't augmented reality. That was a video camera that goes 360. What
No.
is your opinion of the current state of some of them seem to be just tourism device, visit virtual Beverly Hills.
Sure. What? I'm trying to think. Which one was that? Was that Spook Country? Was that
but yeah, that was a plot device that was interesting. But this.
Oh no, no. Pattern recognition. Pattern recognition.
Right.
That was it. Yeah. Anyway, it's so anyway. I mean, so I think when you wind up with something, I think that you wind up with a medium like virtual reality or augmented reality or whatever. When it hits the mass market, you're going to have a spectrum. I mean, of course, you're going to have some of these things that are obviously just commercial products and things like that. Which, hey, you know what? If people got to eat. I mean, that's perfectly fine. And there are people who are doing things that are asking more salient questions. And then the one thing that I thought was really interesting is that I was at a conference on virtual worlds, I think in 2007. And I was having a conversation with Connie Yowell, who was the digital initiatives head for the MacArthur Foundation, and they're out of Chicago, and that's when I was living in Chicago. And the one thing that she always said is that, you know what, when people first get into this, about 80% of the time, what they do is that they recreate their living room, and they make their avatar look like themselves. And she called this orienteering. So I mean, I guess what happens is that to see people going and doing sort of recreations, or basically making manifest things that they'd like to see, or they thought that they saw in a book or something like that. And I'm not going to be so critical. I'm not going to be so critical in saying that. I'm not going to be that critical in it, but I'm just saying that I think a lot of time it's to be expected. And I think what that is that it's a form of learning to walk, and I think that's perfectly fair. I mean, it's sometimes I think it's a little expected, but I think it's perfectly fair. I think it's perfectly justified for people to take a case study or take an exemplar or something like that. Maybe they're not thinking about it, that quite that rigorously, but then implement. And but then what happens is that once they get that done, then hopefully then things get progressively more interesting.
Our mutual friend Bruce Sterling, the science fiction writer, gave a talk once to Solar Austin here in Austin, and in that talk he was talking about how solar and clean energy technologies were starting to get boring, and that was a sign that they were starting to be very well established and well used. That when any technology becomes truly well established and is really starting to be useful, it also kind of loses its cool factor and becomes more boring. And I'm wondering, I had the impression that same thing was happening with mixed reality, with AR and VR and so forth. And I wonder, do you agree with me there? Do you think it's kind of like not as cool and futuristic as it used to be, but now it's starting to be just kind of integrated into our sense of reality?
Well, I mean, I think that for us and like other friends of ours, like Derek Woodgate and Bruce and stuff like that, who part of our business is kind of the future. I think that I think that as being people who are, kind of living, living in that liminal space, between, between the, in the speculative, and those of us who are living in that speculative space, I think for us, we maybe get a little bit bored a little bit sooner. The things, I think for a lot of people, this is still, still pretty cool. But I think, like with gaming and things like that, I think that it's, I think, I think it's starting to become, I think it's starting to become somewhat mainstream. But I think an important distinction to be made, and the thing is that actually, I if Apple brings out its AR glasses, next year, like they're hinting at, I think, I think that's going to be a new version of cool. I think really, what happens is that when the hardware gets kind of, in place, then what happens is then, then the thing is then content becomes king. Then the thing is, it's like, okay, we've all got a headset now, okay, it's like Bruce Springsteen said, 500 channels, nothing on, so the thing is that, all right, man. So what happens is that, okay, what's on VR tonight? What's compelling? I mean, is there going to be something that's profound, or is it going to be Uganda knuckles? Come on, and I think that's really a thing. I think, we have a number of stages here. I think on one hand is that, we have the new device, the new thing, where we have, early adoption. And, there's a, and there's, it's a fun place to be a futurist, it really is. But I think also on the other hand is that once the future is here, and by the way, I used to always have a performance. I used to say, welcome to the future. Welcome to the future. Welcome to the future, because, we're all, the future is always coming. But I think the other thing, Bruce and some folks he's worked with, Salvatore Iaconesi and Oriana Persico out at the, out at the, was I think Near Futures Lab out in Rome. If you think about it, think about Star Trek, the original series. It's like sliding doors. Oh my God, and then the thing is it took like 10 years for sliding doors to become ubiquitous. And then the thing is that then, you had Star Trek: The Next Generation, you had the pad, and then it took maybe 2-3 years for Apple to come out with the iPad. I think really what happens is
also
is that,
the smartphones were predicted pretty much by Star Trek, the communicator.
of course. So I think really what if we're looking at this as, shall we say, like an almost like a expectations curve. I think that people like Bruce have been very correct in the idea that, science fiction has become, a very contested genre because of the acceleration of technology. And in other words, it's like, really what happens is that science fiction, unless it's hard science fiction, like the classics like Clarke and Niven and people like that, things like heavy weather, is now near future speculation. So I think
Maybe not even that. I think that Heavy Weather, which is Bruce Sterling's science fiction novel about people who hack tornadoes, and I think that part of what emerged from that was, in Bruce's case, he came to understand what was happening with climate change, and early on was like founded the Viridian design movement and so forth.
Of course.
And now, that it's well established that we have that problem, and we may not be exactly hacking tornadoes, but uh,
No, no,
there's been
no.
real advances in climatology and weather prediction and that sort of thing that's partly linked to the concerns about climate change.
Sure, sure. I think what I was saying that, I mean, at the time he wrote that, it was, we were starting into this area in which science fiction was really just kind of turning into, I think the notion of science fiction is compressing, and I think I
Because we're
think,
living in it, right? We're living in science
yeah, yeah.
fiction.
Yeah, and you know what? That's another thing that we were talking about earlier. It's like last year, Roy Batty from Blade Runner died. So
Yeah.
now, not now, and then of course, we're 20 years. I'm 19 years after 2001. The eugenics wars of Star Trek. Was in the 1990s. So the thing is that we live in this very strange period of time.
Yet a lot of
It,
the things that were predicted in science fiction never came to pass, but some things that are even stranger than what they might have predicted did come to pass.
yeah, 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 yeah. I totally agree with that.
I always thought
And
it was
so
funny that in like science fiction films and that sort of thing that in the future they always showed people wearing these sort of like futuristic outfits, the
like
kind of
Space
weird.
1999.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And what has actually happened is that people are wearing jeans and t-shirts. So they didn't really predict fashion very well.
yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, I totally agree. And we're not wearing cod pieces, so, you know, so fortunately, Clockwork Orange didn't take place, but it's, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting. Actually, the one thing that I think was kind of interesting is, what was it? It was that we were at South by Southwest that one year that the EFF had its birthday party and that sort of thing. And it was, what was it? I think it was Bruce, Cory Doctorow, who else? You and um, with JP Barlow on that panel. And I think what happened is that there was just the one thing that I thought was really fantastic about that is that just the one point where Bruce just went and said, you know what, this isn't the future I wrote about. And I thought, I thought that was such an affective statement.
Yeah, that was Gareth Brandwin and Chris Brown were the other guys on that panel. And
Okay, okay, yeah,
the
yeah,
recording
yeah.
that you made of that panel, we published last week at Plutopia News Network.
No kidding. Oh,
Yeah,
wow. Okay.
Scoop salvaged it and managed to make a good. I mean, he did some work on it to make it sound a little better because,
Well,
I think the phone was in your pocket part of the time.
oh, I'm
But
sorry. Well, yeah, yeah,
no,
okay.
that's
Well,
fine.
thank
It
you.
actually came out really well, and we
Yeah.
have a historical record of that session.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, that was good. That was really good year. So yeah, I mean, it's, I think and then actually it's kind of interesting is that for about a year or so, the Future Lab and Derek Woodgate, we're out here, him and his partner Albert Weigel, and I think what's interesting here is that there are a couple things. Is that on one hand, um, partially because of the climate, partially because of the culture, mall culture here is, mega mall culture here is still totally viable. In other words, it's like in Dubai, you got like three like mega gallerias. You got the Mall of the Emirates, you've got Dubai Mall, and all sort of thing. And and as I said, you've got the Museum of the Future, and there. Yeah, in other words, the notion of the future is still a really the notion of the future is still a really powerful. Um, and all of a sudden, I realized that I've been like down in the lower quarter of my screen. I think the one thing that's really interesting is that the notion of the future is such a powerful discourse here still in Arabia that actually the people I was working with in setting up the visualization equipment for my lab are the people who were the visualization equipment sourcers for the Saudi court. And I got to see what they were talking about, the NEOM city of the future, that they're talking about putting $500 billion to seed, you know? And, you know, this is the thing out in West Saudi, that they're trying to build, you know, basically a Silicon oasis, you know? And I think this is very interesting that places like Arabia are, are seriously considering the notion of peak oil, you know. And the thing is that they're going to do something else. And the one, some of the strange things is that because some of the carbon footprints here are, so incredibly high, they're really concerned about things like trying to build sustainability and trying to build, cities that are going to be sustainable in this climatologically, fraught future. They're thinking about this, and that's kind of fascinating. But the thing is that there are. I think there's some things that we need to think about. I mean, I think we need to think about things like I think Dubai. I think about 30% of its energy is in desalination. And actually the thing is desalination, you wind up, raising the saline levels of the Gulf, which, does some other issues. So, I mean, the thing is, I'm not necessarily being critical, but I think what happens is I'm not necessarily being critical of the UAE per se. But what I'm doing is I'm just kind of saying is that on one hand, I think the future is a game of whack-a-mole, isn't it? In other words, like we try to solve one thing, and then another thing pops up, and it's just like McLuhan said. The Canadian media theorist and technocultural theorist, Marshall McLuhan. In other words, basically technologies, usually create issues for which we try to find other technologies, to try to solve. And, he really forecasted solutionism.
In your work as a futurist, have you had the experience of seeing something really clearly that is going to happen, and then being blindsided by either technology or cultural change and having it really go south on you? It's like you didn't expect to see that future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, is that a question, or are you saying, in other words, is there something that I saw that I didn't think was going to come?
Right.
Okay.
Future is kind of changeable. Just depending on culture and technology.
Yeah. And you know what? I think the other thing inside, I think the other thing that's really interesting is that, I think, I think William Gibson also said, it's like the future's already here, but it's, it's not evenly distributed. The thing that I thought was really interesting is that when I went out to, I spent a lot of time out in Central Asia, especially Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and things like that. And the thing is that, places like that, I think, are really fascinating, because what happens is that, you have these ruins of ships and that things out on the Aral Sea, and artists doing stuff with that. But then also, on the other hand, like in Mongolia and Kazakhstan and things like that, you've got people who are doing, doing augmented reality, and also doing the idea of it's really interesting is that, using VR to explore the notion of, of step in indigeny. And the other thing is that, I think the one thing that's also very, very important is that I now have very deep ties with Iran. Is that my wife is a um, um, extremely talented illustrator and media artist and that sort of thing from Tehran. And the thing is that we've been doing a lot of telematic performances and things like that. And the thing is that, and we have some friends in Shiraz who actually have a small media collective down there. And the thing is that I think what really fascinates me the most about, not necessarily about things going south, but the thing is that what you find in places that you don't expect to find them. Kind of like how in Southeast Asia, in Southeast Asia, you find the leapfrogging in, from POTS, landline phones to cell phones, and then the other notion of, a lot of times you have, the notion which, was brought up recently in the social dilemma, is that in these areas, you have people basically loading you up with Facebook on your cell phone, and that's the first thing you open up, and you think that's the internet. And to be perfectly honest, is that I think that if I were to say anything about what I have mixed feelings about, I would say is that I'd say there's social media, because I mean, out here in the Middle East, without saying anything that might, could be considered offensive, but the thing is that there are a lot of things that social media made possible out here, But the thing is that, look at also, the notion of things like QAnon. And then, the other thing is I also do have, I do sometimes have some questions, about having been part of, groups like the Yes Men, who did, lighthearted pranks to try to talk about social justice by trying to speak power to corporate entities, that sort of thing. But the thing is that there are equally smart people on on all sides of the fence, and what was the guy who pranked NPR? He took some of our tactics and did those shenanigans. And I mean, sauce for the goose is gravy for the gander, I guess. I mean, that's fair enough. But I mean, you would, I think that in many ways, I consider myself, somebody who still has a sliver of cyber utopianism, kind of like Barlow did when he did the Declaration for Cyberspace Independence and that sort of thing. It's like, I mean, I got on the net in 1983, and for some odd reason, I've just always had that idea that I would always love to see the net be an expression for people's better side. And I think, in saying something that I think went in weird directions, I think the world's networks have gone in some weird directions, and I still have hope. I think if you don't have hope, I think that if you don't have hope, the way is always down. And so I hold on to those sort of Barlow-esque hopes. But
I think
but
we were talking about predictions that you never would have made, and I know that I could have predicted that the internet would be a great facility for social interaction, as it has proved to be. But I
Yeah,
never could have predicted that someone would take advantage of that to basically turn people into products that they sell to advertisers. And we actually held
yeah,
out the hope that advertising on the internet, that there would not be the kind of commercial exploitation of the internet that you saw with television. And in fact, it's even worse now than television if you turn your ad blocker off.
I agree. I agree. And the thing is that I mean that's the what is it that's the whole movie, The Social Dilemma, isn't it? You know, and I mean, and I saw that besides the parts where they have these that kind of weird conceit of the room with the AIs controlling yeah, I think we could have done without that, but the point they get at, in the idea of turning people into product, turning people's attention into product, is it's a hard one.
Yeah, I think one of the failings of the social network, and maybe Shoshana Zuboff too, is kind of assuming that people are so incredibly stupid that they can be manipulated, as though they didn't have a brain in their head. And I don't think that that's true. And I think that a lot of
No,
people who are, I mean, thinking of myself, I see tons of ads when I'm online and I just ignore them. And I think
sure.
most people do ignore those ads. Maybe I shouldn't say that, because then the people who are doing
Well,
the advertising will lose heart. And we certainly don't want to
well,
dash their hopes, but still, I
no.
mean, but it's kind of a
Well,
mess right now, the whole thing.
yeah, I mean, I'm originally from Eastern Ohio, and I mean, I mean, I'm saying, Canton, Ohio ain't Austin, but it's um, yeah, I just kind of
Well, I guess you're
wonder.
you're saying you think some people really can be manipulated in that way.
Oh,
Is that what you mean?
look at the election.
Yeah, I mean, I
You
guess
know,
so.
yeah, if you think about it, if you think about it this way, I mean, there's that site, This Person Does Not Exist, that's basically using, style, AI and style GAN with, with
Oh,
NVIDIA's, new algorithms. And, the people who come out of that look pretty good. And from what I hear, there's some of the fake profiles on new media. I mean, out on social media, are taking are taking those images and using them. So the thing is that we are, if we are not in it, we are at least staring at the wilderness of mirrors in front of us, And the thing is that there are people, and I say this as kind of a culture and media theorist. There are people who do want to believe in what they see on a page or on a screen, at face value. They want, and it's trust, that's been endangered these days. And I think this is the thing that, if certain things happen with, in the near future, and I won't jinx anything by saying what that is and leave it implied.
yeah,
I'm hoping that
I was just gonna
I
say
hope we can rebuild trust.
I've been thinking about the crisis of authority, um, and the question of who really should have authority for our perceptions. The way that we see things, and
Yeah,
it's there is no sort of sense of an authoritative source or a consensus about what's real and what's
yeah,
not real. And right now,
yeah,
politically, for instance, it's you have like opposing forces and great division and the whole thing threatening to explode. But
yeah, 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 yeah.
uh, I, since we're going to run out of time pretty soon, I
Okay,
wanted to
yeah,
give you an opportunity to talk about some of the work that you're doing right now, like the personal taxonomy series, because I think that's pretty
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah,
fascinating.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, this is something, actually. There's a group that was originally out of Rutgers. Ahmed Algamal and his research group. They're, basically they made a platform that made it pretty easy for people to work with generative adversarial networks and do some things. So what I'm doing is I'm either trying to do something significant or I'm spectacularly chasing my tail. So what I've done is that I've done 512, non-representational calligraphies. I have kind of a background in Asian calligraphy, Japanese and a little bit of Persian calligraphy. And so the thing is that I've done these 512 paintings, and what I'm doing is that I'm taking these as two sets of 256, putting them in, kind of testing them against themselves, trying to find the patterns within them. And then I'm going to take, a pattern set, within those, and then put those across, and hopefully those will cancel out. And what I'm trying to do is literally use my own consciousness as, as medium to try to take these things and cancel out, and literally trying to, Noam Chomsky, wrote about, did a lot of work on this notion of deep structure, how basically our brain physiology, deals with certain patterns, how we go. And that also deals with kind of like this notion that Terence McKenna did in 92 in that one thing, Virtual Paradise, talking about concrete language in VR.
So when you talk about deep structure, are you talking about like prelingual?
Yeah.
Below language,
yeah. And then the other thing is that it's sort of like, and then Terence, he was kind of talking about, in VR, what we could do is that we could concretize, this sort of thing. But what I'm trying to do in this AI experiment, I'm trying to basically try to do pattern recognition out of these two sets of paintings, and then trying to cross compare them. And then literally, I'm in the process, probably in the next 2-3 weeks of actually doing this. I'm wondering whether in doing this cross comparison of these analyses of these two bodies of paintings, that I literally come up with these common, these common, what I call personal taxonomies, which at least give me a virtual, a visual representation of my cognitive patterns in my creative process. And the thing is that, so in a way, what I'm really trying to do is I'm really trying to find a visual representation through using AI and GANs to find my inner cognitive structure. But the thing is the next step with that is that I want to talk to some cognitive scientists, if I haven't actually chased my tail like mad, and say, okay, then what can we do with this? How can we decode this? Because really what it is with this project, I'm trying to literally go between neuroscience and consciousness studies and try to make that bridge. But
can you say what GANs is for people who don't know?
Okay, so the generative adversarial networks, GANs, is they're a form of machine learning, and there's a famous example. In other words, what happens is it goes through. You give it two sets of images or data or things like that, and it compares one against the other and tries to find like a false and a true meaning to it. And they're using these things for images, for things like trying to find, trying to go through hundreds of thousands of like chemistry papers to try to find patterns within them, to possibly find solutions that human beings, with sometimes we've just got so much gray matter, to process things, they come across things that, using a huge amount of computational power, we don't normally find. So, so in this case, what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to use, and this is only one type of machine learning. I mean, there are many, many kinds. I mean, when people say AI, it's kind of a buzzword right now. It's, there's just so many different kinds, but this is just one thing that basically takes two sets of data, tries to discriminate patterns and differences between it, and then give you, a result through what they call, a kind of an educated model. But I'm trying to do 2 or 3 or 4 different parts of this to really distill the output of my creative consciousness, to try to get down to, like, what is the essence of what is the essence of the patterns that I use, and on reflecting on that, can I, what can we learn from that, from an art science perspective. And I'm about 2/3 of the way through the journey on that, and I've done a lot of reading on it. But what's going on here is that I don't think that I'm going to have a complete answer for you until I sit down with this data in about the next 2 or 3 weeks, and basically try to talk to some neuroscientists and cognitive scientists, and see whether there's something really interesting here. But the images are beautiful.
Where is there someplace we can go to see the images now, or will there be when you're finished?
Yeah, there'll be a personal taxonomy site in probably about a month or 2. But if you go out on my Instagram or my Facebook, I just put some things out from on my Facebook, and I'm just usually Pat Lichty, Patlichty, and I'm at Patlichty, and the only other thing that I can say is that there's just, if I can be indulged, is that I have one other project is that that's about to launch, is during the COVID lockdown here in the Emirates, I found myself basically locked into about 2 kilometers around my apartment. And then I was able to go into Abu Dhabi, and then I was able then for like 2 days at a time to go into the other Emirates. And there was an app that's no longer around called Displayland. And honestly, when the lockdown came down, and I was there with my wife, and I just didn't know what to do. I really felt lost. So I just basically went on these long walks, and I'd start doing these 3D scans of the landscapes around me. And this expanded to things like going to the Louvre and going to the Cultural Foundation, and going up to the old gunrunners plane from God of War, which is actually up in Quwain, so I scanned that and that sort of thing. And so basically what happens is that it's almost like a Google Street View, tour that it's going to launch in probably about the next 2 weeks as well at something called Nation 2.0 that's being run by a guy named Giuseppe Moscatello here in Dubai. And what it is it's really just about these being in the COVID situation, and having these sets of constraints, and how I saw the world through this. And actually, a lot of it was when you see it, it's very dreamlike, and it's very fractured, and it's very. And the thing is that I think, at least in the early days, I think that our consciousness, our ontology, our experience of life, became very fractured. I
felt that. Yeah.
And this is just a representation of my experience of the fracturing of reality under the COVID shock.
And where will that be findable?
Yeah, there's just in about 2-3 weeks, there's a confinementspaces.com, and then there's also Nation 2.0, which actually is on Instagram right now. And actually, some of the stills from it have been featured in Italy at by a group called New Digital Collage. It's a year-long exhibition. So yeah, but the Louvre Abu Dhabi scanned really weird. It's pretty cool. And the thing is that that's the interactive thing that you'll see in the next month or so. And I have large scale prints to go up, and videos and things like that. And it'll probably be a project that I'll be exploring for the next 2-3 years.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Patrick. This has been a great conversation. We really appreciate you joining us today.
We need to have you back soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to follow up after these things have become more visible.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I've been working on these things for, the confinement space is about 6 months now, and this personal taxonomies I've been working on for over 2 years now. So I'm glad to see them finally getting ready to go.
Yeah, it sounds like great work.
Fantastic.
Okay, well,
so
we've reached the end. So again, we really appreciate it, and let's stay in touch better this time.
Okay, absolutely, brother. Thank you.
Okay, man.
So, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Good meeting you.
Okay.
So.
You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. With John Lepkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.